All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Megan Carmelani, and I'm the founder of Long COVID Families, and we're hosting a Q&A event with a wonderful group of researchers who I'm going to go ahead and ask to introduce one by one. And our host is Amy, who's a member of Long COVID Families and a mom to a child with Long COVID as well. So Michelle, just because you're at the top of the screen for me, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle, and I am the project coordinator for the research project that we are proposing to you guys today for potential participation. So I am with DePaul University, specifically with the Center for Community Research. And I work with my lovely colleagues here today. Lauren and Megan are here, as well as Dr. Jason. And we have an additional person on our team who is not here today, but if you do end up participating, you might also hear from her. Her name is Nicole.
Thank you. Dr. Jason, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, Leonard Jason, the director of the Center for Community Research, and we're most interested in what's called ME-CFS, ME for myalgic encephalomyelitis, CFS for chronic fatigue syndrome. And we've been studying that for several decades. And most recently, we've been looking at a longitudinal study, college students who have been well and then got mono caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, and some recovered, some didn't. So it's a prospective longitudinal study, and you'll hear a little bit more about that study, but we're doing a 6-7 year follow-up of it right now. And our long COVID comparison study is going to be those people who have had SARS-CoV-2, and we'll compare some of those to our college students who got mono and compare those two groups. But you'll hear more about that study, and delighted to kind of be part of this group.
Thank you. All right, Megan, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Megan as well. I'm a research assistant on the long COVID grant team with Lauren and Michelle. And yeah, I'm hoping to help explain the study a bit, the need for the study, and maybe get some people recruited.
Great. Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I work with Megan and Nicole on our studies, mono and long COVID grant projects, which are very closely related. And I'm sure we'll explain more about that when we actually discuss the studies. But yeah, more specifically, I'm mainly doing research on long COVID right now. And I'm working on a specific research project that's using machine learning to create to develop a case definition for long COVID that can be used in research and also with in medical settings, because I'm sure, as you guys are probably aware, there's not really a standard definition for long COVID at the moment. So research is like kind of hard to compare across studies because different researchers are calling long COVID different things, which is a big problem. And also in terms of treatment, just not having a standard definition for long COVID can be a big hurdle for patients to go through in order to get the treatment they need. So that's one of the applications of the research that we're doing here, and just a little bit more about what I'm doing specifically. But it's nice to meet all of you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Amy.
All right. My name is Amy, and I'm in the Boston area, and my son, who is 17 and a half, has had long COVID for 18 months now. So definitely interested in this kind of a study. So I look forward to chatting with you, because we, as a family, feel that in doing investigating and defining and all that is so important. to then hopefully at some point have some things out there to help people with their symptoms. So.
Amy is our volunteer that is gonna start helping us more with research and connecting with researchers and hopefully helping facilitate recruitment also as well. So and then I see Darla just joined.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah, mind introducing yourself?
Also see my daughter is on here. We're both on here at the same time, so she may have introduced herself, Heather Stroud. My granddaughter, Aubrey, has been dealing with long COVID since January of 2022. So quite a long time. Just when we think that we're making some headway, we continue to experience different symptoms and so forth. And I too, both my daughter and I have reached out to researchers and doctors around the world to see who would you send your child to if this was your child experiencing these things, a perfectly normal child, very healthy and active and overachiever, experiencing these life-altering changes. Where would you send your child? We've yet to get any solid answers on that. So that's what we're on here for, is to learn more.
Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Amy, who's going to facilitate the Q&A.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we start with, do you want to describe the long COVID study?
Sure.
And who would like to take that?
I can do that. And I do have a visual aid if that would be helpful for anyone to follow along with. If I do have screen share, let me just make sure.
Everybody learns differently, so a visual aid would be great.
Of course. Let's see. Can everyone see the Word document on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so before I kind of dig into this, I know Dr. Jason kind of briefly touched on how the COVID study is technically a supplemental grant to our MECFS research. So just to kind of give a brief overview of that for some context, I believe it was between 2014 and 2016, we recruited college-age participants from a university in Chicago. And we had this extraordinary opportunity to actually collect baseline information on these students before they developed mono. Obviously, most of them did not go on to develop mono, but some of them did. And because we collected baseline information on several thousand students, there was actually a decent amount of students that we did have baseline on that went on to further develop mono. I believe it was about a 6-month check-in. And so this was a longitudinal study, and over the course of our check-in, I believe it was a 6-month and then a 1-year follow-up. We saw if these participants developed mono, and then if they ever recovered from mono. So if they ended up having what we constitute as like a specific case definition for MECFS, which I'm assuming you may have heard of this or familiar with. I kind of butcher the name when I say it's myalgic encephalomyelitis, I believe is the pronunciation, or more colloquially known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And there are lots of case definitions kind of floating around. There's not like a general consensus of what exactly it should be called, how it should be diagnosed between the patient community, the research community, the medical community. So obviously, you know, research is important because we're trying to really like nail down how is it manifesting? Are there any predictors for who developed MECFS, who didn't recover, the severity, things of that nature. So as Dr. Jason mentioned, we have this group of participants that we've been following now for, I think it's roughly about 6 years at this point, and we're still collecting data on them. And we now have this participant pool that we are trying to compare with people that have now developed long COVID. So people that were diagnosed with COVID or had COVID, but maybe weren't actually formally diagnosed and then never recovered. So we're trying to see if the pathology of developing ME/CFS from things like mono, Epstein-Barr is similar, and how it can be compared to the development of long COVID. So that's where this study kind of comes into play. So we're hoping to kind of match the participants from our original mono grant to this supplemental grant to basically do some comparison analyses. So I'll get into the COVID study now. So like I said, we're kind of, sorry, did someone say something? Oh, okay.
No, I just said thank you.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, the premise of the study is really to just kind of understand how long COVID kind of works. And yeah, this is obviously a great group to kind of recruit from, because you obviously know like the impacts of long COVID, and we'd really love to bridge the connection with people that are experiencing this and the research that we do. So yeah, I'll get into kind of what the study entails. Firstly, we start off with a brief screener, which would be completed online. So it takes about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's just to go over some basic demographic information, and then a few like symptom frequency severity questions, common symptoms of long COVID, like headaches, body aches, fatigue, things of that nature. And this is just to help us determine eligibility, as well as if the person would be considered in a long COVID cohort. I know this patient group, I think, has lots of parents, right? So probably many of your children are still minors. And if that's the case, we just ask that parents are completing these elements, the screener with the participant, as well as throughout the rest of the study. So if you qualify for the study, or your child qualifies for the study, you will be contacted by one of our lovely research assistants here with us today. And they're gonna start trying to get the scheduling portion done. So there is a medical appointment that is completed with our study physician, typically about 30 to 45 minutes. And that can be done via telehealth or in person. I know not everyone is from Chicago, so most of the case will probably be telehealth. And if it is telehealth, then we also will have a mobile phlebotomist who will collect blood at a separate scheduled date from the participant for the blood sampling section. And then we also have a virtual interview with one of the research staff. Typically takes anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes a little under, sometimes a little over, and that's via Zoom. And then additionally, we have a more in-depth survey, which will be pretty similar to the screener, but it'll go a little more in depth with symptom manifestation and a few other measures that we typically look into, such as like mental health and physical health. So yeah, and then additionally, if your participant is a minor, the parent will need to be present for the medical appointment, the interview, and the blood draw. And they will also be given their own survey to complete as a parent, which is very similar to the one that the participant would complete, but it's just for us to gain additional insight into the kind of outlook for how your child has COVID. Because, it's one thing to have COVID, but as a parent, you kind of get like a different lens as to your child's health. So that's just an additional way for us to kind of collect some information. And then after we have all of those components complete, so that's the screener, the survey, the medical appointment and lab, and then the interview, you will be compensated with a $100 digital gift card. So those are all of the components of the study. But I did just want to touch briefly on risk and benefits. So risks, the risk associated with a blood draw is just standard procedure. Usually, like if there is any pain, it usually subsides within a day or two, maybe some mild bruising. But for the most part, it's just a very standard blood draw. And then benefits from the study is that the medical exam that you undergo is free of charge. So that's just a benefit of participating in the study. And additionally, you can request that the medical information collected during this exam is forwarded to your primary physician for your records. So yeah, that's everything that I have in regards to the COVID study. Does anyone have any questions on any of the components? Anything that you want me to go a little more in depth on?
So one question that's in the chat that also came up before our meeting today was about if somebody does the screener, will they hear if they don't qualify? Because some of our group has done the screener and they have not heard from a researcher.
So it is completely possible that we just have not been able to contact you yet. But I think that might be a better question for one of my RAs, because I know they kind of do the more front end correspondence with participants. Lauren, I think I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, so I recognized the individual who asked this question in the chat. But yeah, we're currently experiencing a large influx of screeners right now because we're also recruiting a lot of controls right now from DePaul University. So we have a lot of screeners to sort through and then organize and then figure out who's going to call and schedule with people. So yeah, we're kind of just working through that right now, but we should get back to people who have completed screeners within the next week.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm just going through our questions.
So I see a question in the chat.
Why don't you answer that one and then we'll go on to the next one, which is on another screen.
Someone asked who specifically is conducting the research and what is the benefit to the individual who participates. So Dr. Jason here is one of the principal investigators on this study, as well as Dr. Ben Katz, who is our physician we work with at Lurie Children's Hospital. Dr. Katz will be the one who conducts the physical examination, even via telehealth. And him and Dr. Jason have been working together for quite some time. I'm sure he could tell you about that if he wants to, but they have a long history of working, studying ME/CFS specifically, which is a post-viral illness, which definitely could lend some insight into something like long COVID, which is a very, novel post-viral illness as well. As Michelle mentioned, we might be able to see some similarities or differences. The knowledge that we have at the Center for Community Research with post-viral illnesses like ME/CFS, I think could help us a lot to understand long COVID, which then as a participant, if you are someone who either has long COVID or you have a child or loved one who has long COVID, the benefit of this research, this study may not be immediately impactful, but in the scheme of things, you are supporting research that is hoping to support you in the long run so that we can help long COVID patients, people that are struggling with this, with getting the healthcare that they need and the understanding from doctors, that by studying it, we can understand it and get these people the help they need. As far as the interview goes, that would either be me, it would be Lauren, or it would be our other research assistant, Nicole, who is not present today. We typically do the interviews via Zoom, especially if you're not in Chicago, then we have hours from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Time available Monday through Friday for interviews. And the survey is done on your own time. And the blood draw and lab testing would be a mobile phlebotomist. We are currently working with Travelab. They have phlebotomists based nationally, so we can work with you pretty much wherever you are. and you can request an appointment time that is convenient for you from the comfort of your own home.
One other question: how many children or adolescents are you trying to enroll for this study?
So currently, I believe we are doing 48 long COVID, 48 non-long COVID. So if they've developed COVID and recovered. And I believe we're doing that as to as closely as possible match the group that we have from the mono grant as kind of like a control and long COVID group compared to a control and MECFS group from our mono grant.
Okay. And you had mentioned with the mono study that it was longitudinal. How long do you envision the long COVID sub-study running?
So with the long COVID study, all of the elements of the study with the medical appointment, the interview, and the survey can all be completed kind of when the participant feels like that. And that's all they're committing to when they join our initial study. We do have a clause. We might reach out to you guys if you participate in our initial study, if we have more research ideas or like we have more information we want to gather with you, but that's optional. That's very similar actually to what we're doing now with the mono study. We're recontacting some of the participants from that initial study to see if any of them got COVID, and then seeing if anyone now has long COVID from that initial group, because we have baseline data from them. So that could be very valuable potential data to collect from them again now. But yeah, that's just like an example of something we might contact you about. But if you do this COVID study, all you're committing to is the medical appointment, at the interview, and the survey, and there's no particular longitudinal components, but we may recontact you about some of that if an opportunity becomes available, and this would be a separate study.
Okay. All right. That was a question from my son who, would love to be able next year to go to college, does not know yet where that would be. So, you're looking at this as a sort of a one and done, but you might then go out and research more things and come back to this pool of people. Okay.
Yeah, so hypothetically, like for this current study we're doing, someone could get it done in a day if they were really feeling ambitious, because we could schedule the medical appointment and the interview on the same day if that works out with your schedule. And then if you want to complete the survey that same day, you totally can. But I think if you're participating not in Chicago, because we also have to schedule the mobile phlebotomy, I mean, it may take 2 to 3 days if you really want to get it done fast.
And I don't think that wasn't where he was coming from. It was more of the,
right.
I don't know if I'm going to make it to school tomorrow, right? And now we're layering on trying to figure out college, and
Totally.
You're looking at people who are in that 17 to 22 year old.
Yeah, we totally want to work with people's schedules. So on the flip side of what I said, we can totally, if you need more time, we can allow for that as well. And we have definitely worked with participants who have needed more time in between components, and we've been able to allow them that.
Okay, that's good, because pacing's important. So yeah. All right. Let me see. We're curious, what do you think is the slowest part of this research? We have we suspect it may be getting the people to enroll, but we're curious to hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, my colleagues may have different opinions, but with long COVID being such like a kind of like novel diagnosis, there's not many people who have that or like know they have it. So finding people with long COVID in particular who can enroll has been difficult. That's why patient groups like this one are such a great resource for our research team. But yeah, that has been the most difficult because I think as we've covered, the individual components of the study, I think are pretty doable and straightforward. It's just finding the right people who qualify for our studies. That way we can compare our results with the mono study. That's been the most difficult part, I think, on our end so far.
Okay. All right. And then there was a follow-up that just came in from Darla. And she said, so I understand the participation of the individual is only the medical labor work and interview, or are there other expectations?
Yeah, so the only like physically demanding things would be the medical appointment and blood draw. But even the medical appointment can be via telehealth, as well as the Zoom interview. And then there is the one component of completing the survey. So there's the short qualifying screener. And then if you do qualify, you fill out the longer screener. Sorry, survey, longer survey.
All right. And you had mentioned that families can request their the results be forwarded to their care team.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right. And one other question that is, could you clarify the age range? That was something that got asked on our Facebook group.
Yeah, so presently we are looking to age match as closely as possible with the demographics of our mono study that we are hoping to compare. So most of the participants that we have from that study are in the 17 to 22 age range at the time of completing the study. So that's our target demographic for the COVID study as well. But if you have a child that's like 16 going on 17, like that's not necessarily an exclusion for us, as well as 23, like we wouldn't say a hard no if you were just outside of our range. We're just hoping to get as close to our mono study participant pool as possible, just for data analysis security.
Okay. I think that had to do, with somebody who was like 16 and a half, right? So, all right. And then a follow-up. So 10 years old would be too young for what you're looking for this specific research.
For this research, yes, I would say our cutoff would be at the very, very lowest. I think, I don't know, Dr. Jason, if you want to confirm or not, but I would say 15 maybe as the absolute youngest that we would take at this point. Yeah.
All right. I'm just going through our questions. All right, and you touched upon the blood draw. Is the company that you're using, Travelab, do they have a website? Because we do have people who are in fairly rural areas who, weren't sure if they would be covered by your the company that you're using.
Yes, they do have a service map on their website. I mean, maybe I can show that now. Okay, can you see this map? This is the service map. So all of these little green ticks are areas where there are mobile phlebotomists available with Travelab.
Okay, great. And then one other sort of follow-up question, is there any plans to study other age groups? I know that you mentioned that you're trying to keep this particular one with mono, but are there any other things that you might be researching with long COVID at a future time?
I mean, I know in the past, people in our research team have studied pediatric groups of like younger ages. Like we just had a graduate student working in our lab who did some extensive interviews with much younger participants than what we're doing in our current study. So one thing I did want to like note, if you're not sure if you're going to qualify for our study because of your child's age, if they might fall out of our range, I would recommend still doing the screener anyway. So that way we can just determine if they qualify for this study, and if not, there might be another research opportunity we would have that we might contact you about.
I think that is it for the questions that we had prepared. Anything else that we need to know about before we close?
And Lauren, you had a chance to give what you wanted to. Was there anything more you wanted to say, Lauren?
I mean, I think our team did a pretty good job of covering the different components of the study. I just had, you know, some notes I took before this meeting about some of the the various issues surrounding pediatric long COVID specifically. A lot of my notes came from this book that actually Dr. Jason edited, just about long COVID and the various symptoms and behavioral impacts of it, and how it's being interpreted in the medical field. But I would strongly recommend this book if anyone wants any more reading. It's an excellent collation of just a lot of different studies. I can hold it up again. I can also just put the title in the chat if anyone
please.
wants to look it up. I feel like that would be easiest. So yeah, I'll do that in a bit. But essentially, I mean, while I was doing literature research, it came across to me at least, well, a lot of pediatric long COVID cases seem to be characterized specifically by inflammation that's multi-system, and it's kind of hard, I feel like, for researchers to especially pinpoint which symptoms are the most significant in pediatric cases, which is why I think research like what we're doing with our study is so important. The more answers we can get to this, the more we can understand what's actually happening biologically with cases of long COVIDs. That way we can treat it more and narrow down how we would want to frame a case definition. Oh, thank you, Michelle. The title's in the chat now. But yeah, that's all I had to say.
Really appreciate it, and appreciate the work you guys are doing. I will just share, as far as like MECFS, we are getting reports from families that of symptoms in children as young as 4 and 5 that seem very aligned with MECFS. So if there's anybody out there that wants to do younger ages, I think there is a population there that is to be studied, and really appreciate it, because a lot of the symptoms are getting dismissed as behavior, because symptoms manifest as behavior, right? So like you have a migraine and you're 8, it's not going to be, I have a migraine. It's going to be a sensory meltdown in a classroom. It's those sorts of things. And so I just want to emphasize the benefit to the patient and to the individual and to the overarching community is that in order to get the care we need, in order to get the recognition we need, in order to get the resources we need for the community, we have to understand what it is. And so that's why we have to participate in the research.
So Megan, if it's okay, I can give a little presentation as well to give an overview of some of the kind of things that I've been trying to do with the Recover Network that has to do with methodology. So I'm going to share my screen, and this is a presentation, and as some of you might know, I've been kind of working with the Recover Network, which is a very large group of hubs around the country. Over $1 billion was spent to establish it. Thousands of people with long COVID and people who have been exposed to SARS-CoV-2 are being followed over time. One of the problems has been the pediatric group. And just real quickly, the CDC estimates that about 1 in 5 people develop long COVID after infection. For youth, it might be 13 to 15% experience symptoms after 5 weeks of SARS-CoV-2 infection. And during the first 2 years of the pandemic worldwide, over about 400 million confirmed cases. Many have gone undocumented. And there could be 100 million people now living with long COVID. And the rapid antigen test fails to detect the virus in 36% of children. So as we've been talking about, the symptoms for youth include breathing problems, cardiac issues, changes to sense of smell, taste, mental and physical fatigue, headaches, mental and behavioral health, MISC, and symptoms of diabetes. Among known respiratory viruses, only COVID-19 has killed more than 100 US children in a month in the modern era. And that did so 3 times during the Delta and Omicron alone. And actually, COVID-19 is actually more deadly than the flu. And a lot of people don't know that. And worst of all is that over 95% of people with long COVID experience some stigma. And that's with several recent reports that have come out. So for the Recover project, I was very active within a commonalities committee and a diagnostic subcommittee. And I've made several presentations to people on Recover. And if you can believe it, they do not ask youth or a guardian if they've been diagnosed with ME/CFS. And I have been strongly urging them that they should ask that question so we could find out how many youth have ME/CFS. And I've been also arguing that they should use validated case definitions. For example, some think they have ME/CFS, but they don't meet the case definition. Others have ME/CFS and are not aware. Community-based surveys indicate the vast majority do not know they have ME/CFS. So you really need to have good instruments and good questions. And that's what we've been focusing on at DePaul University for many years, to develop those types of good questionnaires. So the Recover Network has good questions about POTS. Have you ever been told that you have POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or other forms of dysautonomia? So that is in the Recover questionnaire. And later they ask about other questions, yes, no, feeling your heart beating really fast, when not doing exercise, feeling like your heart beating fast when doing exercise, and feeling faint when you're going to faint. So, and they also have, for some individuals, this kind of lie supine for 5 minutes, and then going to kind of sort of standing up. So, and they look at kind of whether there's a change in heart rate and blood pressure from lying down to standing up. So this is something that they're currently doing. In the adults, we have a case definition that has been kind of somewhat popular. It's called the Institute of Medicine, and that involves substantial reduction in the ability to engage in pre-illness levels of activity that lasts for more than 6 months and is accompanied by fatigue, post-exertional malaise, unrefreshing sleep, and either neurocognitive impairment or orthostatic intolerance. So in 2017, a pediatric case definition, clinical case definition was developed, and they asked for people to have 6 months of symptoms and having 3 criteria: impaired function, that's loss of mental or physical stamina, and a substantial reduction in ability to take in personal, educational, social activities, post-exertional symptoms, and fatigue. And then 2 of the next 3 criteria: sleep, cognitive, or pain. However, many years before that, we developed a research case definition off what's called the Canadian criteria. And here are the Canadian criteria: post-exertional malaise, unrefreshing sleep, pain, 2 or more neurocognitive manifestations, and at least 1 symptom from 2 of the following categories, in either autonomic, neuroendocrine, or immune. And the pediatric case definition could be classified as either severe or moderate, but we only asked for 3 months, not 6 months, as the other 2017 criteria suggested. We think after 3 months, you should be able to make a diagnosis. And basically, this is some of the criteria for one of the criteria. And for the moderate, it's just a little bit easier to meet the criteria. We don't need to go into all these details. So one of the problems with the case definitions and the criteria for symptoms is that they almost all rely on occurrence or frequency. So does something occur or not? How frequently does it occur? But that really doesn't incorporate severity. So in a sense, something could occur frequently, like you might have a pain in your arm, but it's not severe and it doesn't impair your functioning. In a recent JAMA article by the same Recover Network, they listed 12 symptoms and only 3 had severity ratings. So in other words, the majority of the symptoms, when they try to decide who has what they call past positive or long COVID, rely on occurrence or frequency rather than severity data, which is, I think, a problem with what they're doing. And we have tried to integrate more severity ratings for key symptoms into the adult study, and we've been actually successful in doing that recently. And now we're trying to do the same with the pediatric sample. So take a look at some of the questions they have in the pediatric sample. They ask, feeling very tired after walking, but many ME/CFS youth are not walking. So that's probably, PAM is really not asked at all in the pediatric protocol. They asked this question, but again, this is really not a good measure of post-exertional malaise. They also have questions about sleep, feeling sleepy during the day, trouble sleeping, and how many hours do you sleep? But this key question, feeling unrefreshed after you wake up, is not on the protocol. And that's a problem because the single best item in one of our recent articles differentiating long COVID from ME/CFS was unrefreshing sleep. So you really want to ask that question.
I'm sorry, could Dr. Jason, could you just clarify that? So unrefreshing sleep is something you're seeing in the long COVID past patient population with pediatrics, but it's not being asked with Recover?
So at the present time, the question unrefreshing sleep is not in the protocol. I have advocated that it should be placed in the protocol. They are taking my suggestions. It's hopefully going to be integrated into it, but as of now, it has not. But that's something that I've been arguing for. And that's because in long COVID, feeling unrefreshed after you wake up is generally not something that the youth indicate. But if you have people with ME/CFS, that is a defining differentiator from long COVID, from a study that was just recently published in Frontiers in Medicine, and I was one of the co-authors of it.
Just to be clear, you could have long COVID and ME/CFS, correct?
And some people within long COVID have ME/CFS, absolutely. And basically, that's a group that we need to study. And I've been arguing that within the long COVID samples, they should be looking at ME/CFS. But the only way you're going to determine whether they have ME/CFS is if you ask the right questions. And a lot of the questions have been not asked appropriately, which is what I've been kind of arguing for.
Well, thank you for
Another
doing
key
this.
question is cognitive impairment. And, problems with remembering things, problems with focusing on things, that's occurrence, yes or no. But these problems are common. You really want to kind of have frequency and severity measures. A low frequency event, even with high severity, does not meet threshold. And a high frequency and low severity event also does not meet threshold from our perspective. These are some other symptoms that are currently being asked. And you can see they are yes/no answers. And here's some other questions that are yes/no answers. And what we've suggested is that they should really be using questions out of something that's validated. And we have a questionnaire called the DePaul Symptom Questionnaire. And that indicates whether a person has ME/CFS or not. It's being used around the world. We have a short form of it that has 14 items, can be used to assess patients in 3 to 5 minutes, and can determine whether a person has ME/CFS. So again, I wanted to just give a little bit of science and the psychometrics. If you think about it, if you have a kind of sort of stack of cards and you've got a pyramid, the foundation of that stack is the case definition. And whether a person has something or doesn't have something is a starting point for any disease, any illness. And if you can't do that reliably, then everything else is built on that foundation is shaky. That means the prevalence, that means finding biomarkers, that means finding treatments that might be effective for individuals. So all this really is based on getting it right, being able to identify those who have an illness versus don't. Now, I know with COVID-19, you say, well, it's easy to know because there's just one illness. Well, there's actually several variations, and there's vaccinations, and there's basically other things that are happening in their people's lives. So it's not that easy. And ME/CFS is also complicated, but remember that the majority of people indicate that the virus was something that precipitated it. And in most cases, that virus is mononucleosis. So the ME/CFS field could be just as strategic, just as targeted as people in the long COVID field with PASC or SARS-CoV-2. So they're both important viruses to study and to see what happens after. We have an unusual situation in that we have probably the only data set in the world that has actually, it's a prospective data set where we have people before they got sick. We can see what happens when they got an illness, mono, caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, and we could see them over time. And now with our study that Michelle and Lauren and Megan have described, we'll be able to see how they might be different from those individuals who have had the misfortune of having SARS-CoV-2, and some of whom recovered, some of whom have not. So thank you for being willing to hear a little bit of the science of psychometrics, which I always like talking about, but it's sometimes people kind of wonder why we focus on these very small details, but that's what science is about.
Thank you for that. I just, as you were talking, what I was thinking was, So we know in adults that there seems to be a reactivation of Epstein-Barr after COVID, right? I don't think we know in children. I mean, you could suggest it's probably happening in kids too, but we don't know. But I can say that it is very common for a child to get COVID and then get mono within 2 months.
I mean, that's something that the Recover Network could very easily be looking at. There is a group, that I'm actually one of them, that's going to be looking at EBV among those Epstein-Barr virus, among those who have been affected by adults with kind of COVID in this very big Recover trial. That effort is now kind of ongoing to see kind of what happened with those people who ended up kind of getting either new EBV or reactivation of EBV after getting SARS-CoV-2. But something like that would be excellent in pediatrics. There's a very large data set, but that data set is dependent on basically asking the right questions so that we can appropriately categorize those youth.
Right. Okay. The other, and this is probably outside of what you guys do, but the other thing that gets me a little nervous about our kids, because we're on such an infection cycle because of schools, is that what we'll see is, right, the child will get COVID and then get hit with some sort of flu, RSV, and then get hit with some sort of bacterial infection, usually strep throat. And then only if the doctor thinks about testing, they'll check for mono. And it's almost every time a parent will request the test for mono, it comes back positive. We're not even checking. It's kind of, I feel like it might be getting lost in all the infections that are happening. And then that makes me nervous about antibiotics, because doesn't certain antibiotics do certain things to mono? And does that increase? Am I outside what you guys study?
Well, basically, there's antivirals for viruses, but the antibiotics would be for bacterial infections. And basically, kind of what the Epstein-Barr virus would be, as well as SARS-CoV-2, unless the people have bacterial infection, as you suggested, that might kind of come on, and then very appropriately, antibiotics would be appropriate. So yes, all this stuff is fascinating, is needed to be studied, and very important work.
We actually are going to schedule a Q&A with Recover researchers here in the next month for everybody who's listening. So come to that session. We certainly could ask about this. So
we can ask them if they finally incorporated the questions I've asked them to answer.
Good. But thank you, everybody. Is that it, Amy? Do we have any last questions?
Nope, that is it.
All right. Really appreciate your time. And so we'll post the recording in our forum and share with our community. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.